Thank you, Jonathan. I emailed Jonathan before the event to find out what he'd be talking about, and thinking, maybe, hopefully, our two addresses might dovetail neatly. When he replied to me, I thought, well, next best thing. We're talking about completely different things, so at least we won't end up having a fight. However, just having listened to what you've said, Jonathan, I think there are some interesting commonalities when it comes to the relationship between online learning and the offline world, the actual physical context which surrounds the digital learning. I work for an organisation called Tinder Foundation. We are a not-for-profit social enterprise based in Sheffield, and we are the leading digital inclusion practice organisation in the UK. We are funded by the NHS, the DWP, Business Innovation and Skills. We work with the BBC and the British Council. And we manage a network of over 2,800 centres which form the UK Online Centres network. There is no such thing as a typical centre, but in the mix we have community organisations, we have adult learning providers, we have libraries, we have charities, we have support groups for disadvantaged members of society. We have a very wide range of organisations on our network, and the kind of organisations will give you the clue that although we built the network, although we managed the network, we did not create the organisations that are part of it. A lot of them have been around longer than we have. A number of them have been around longer than the internet, and I know of at least a couple that have been around longer than television. Their priorities as support organisations are constantly changing, shifting, dictated by changes in technology, changes in society. At the moment, digital inclusion is a buzz topic, a very hot topic with a lot of research and a lot of funding behind it. But from their point of view, ultimately they only have one priority, which is to help people in crisis, to provide learning opportunities. And together they teach basic online skills to about 50,000 people every month. So who are our learners? Who are the people that the network supports? Well, they are by definition digitally excluded. Digital exclusion is technically defined as a lack of one of three things. Either basic IT skills, which are very basic. We're talking about the ability to use email, to browse between websites, to use an online search like Google. A lack of access to an internet-connected computer, and a lack of a combination of psychological factors, which might involve confidence, motivation, or an ability to, this is why I need the notes, you see. And a sense that being online has some value and some relevance for them. The best recent data that we have on digital exclusion, and we do have a lot, comes from the BBC, the Office of National Statistics, Ofcom, and the Oxford Internet Institute. We know that there are 11 million people still in the UK who do not have basic digital skills that I just outlined. Of those, nearly half are from work in either unskilled manual labour or are economically inactive. More than half are disabled, more than half are over 65, and there is significant overrepresentation from rural communities and some sections of some black and minority ethnic communities. Obviously, the numbers indicate that there is considerable overlap between those various categories. As well as being digitally excluded, our learners are often socially excluded. For the last financial year, we have figures of about 85% of our learners being socially excluded, which is technically defined as having an income of less than £10,000, educated below level 2, that's a GCSE A to C pass, being in receipt of means-tested benefits, residing in social housing association housing. If you tick at least one of those boxes, you are counted as socially excluded, and a lot of our learners tick several. That's a definition of social exclusion, but from what I'm talking about, a more interesting way to think about it is, what does social exclusion feel like? What are the experiences and attitudes of a socially excluded person and how they view the world? I think there tends to be a feeling of isolation, and related to it, a feeling of stasis, of immobility, a feeling that one is not going anywhere in life, either literally or figuratively. This might be something quite obvious and keenly felt if you think of a housebound pensioner who lives on their own, Or it might be a more subtle form of isolation, like the isolation of a disadvantaged community, where employment beyond a limited range of low-skilled jobs is unlikely, and where physical relocation to a more affluent community is extremely rare. As well as isolation and stasis, a lack of information, a lack of knowledge resources contributing to a feeling of powerlessness, an unawareness not simply of how to access sources of information that could improve things like your mental or physical health, your job prospects, your education, but an unawareness that these resources even exist. So the good news is that our network is reaching socially excluded people. 85% of our learners in the last year were socially excluded. 97% of the centres that we fund are located in the top 10% most deprived wards in the UK. And it's easy to imagine how the basic online skills that I described, centred as they are around communicating and finding information, might help socially excluded people to overcome their isolation and lack of resources. So far so good. Overcome digital exclusion, and you're on your way to overcoming social exclusion. This is simplistic, and it's wishful thinking, which is nevertheless indulged with by any number of government departments who repeatedly say we would like to save people from the scourge of digital exclusion, when what they actually mean is we spent an awful lot of money on our website, and it would really save us a lot of trouble if people used that instead of picking up the phone all the time. People are not socially excluded because they are digitally excluded. Social exclusion has been around a lot longer than digital exclusion. But there's good evidence to show that digital exclusion matters, that it creates barriers for people who are already disadvantaged, and that to overcome it has tangible benefits. Again, this is easy to say, but getting people there is not easy. Engagement is a huge issue. To physically get a socially and digitally excluded person to a computer, or get a computer to them, to convince them, once that's done, that they should sit down in front of it and start to learn, to encourage them, support them, convince them why they should get online, can be a struggle, and generally the more socially excluded a person is, the bigger the struggle. Our network are experts in this, working as they do at the ground level, at a local level within communities. They are able to identify and meet individual support needs, which will vary depending on the individual learner, but might include basic literacy and numeracy, healthcare, counselling, careers advice. They'll provide encouragement, build confidence, and convince learners of the benefits of their using the internet, not for local authorities, central government, but for themselves. Above all, our centres provide their learners with an accessible environment where familiar, trusted faces and peers alongside whom they can learn. This brings me on to online communities. From what I've said, I think there's little doubt that online communities can be of obvious and immediate value in helping people to overcome social exclusion, providing, as they do, the opportunity to learn, to share experiences and ideas, build social capital and feelings of self-efficacy. Who in the room uses Facebook? No, not as many as I thought. Who in the room thinks they use Facebook too much? Anyone make a New Year's resolution to use Facebook less? If any one of us was banned from using Facebook or any social networking site, it would probably inconvenience us a little bit. It would probably make us a little bit less information rich. But being as we are educated, highly socially excluded, it would be difficult to argue that it would put us at a significant disadvantage, that it might impair our health, wealth, or well-being. But an elderly person using Facebook to stay in touch with distant relatives, somebody suffering with cancer to use an online forum to share their experiences with other people with the same condition, these things are of enormous, sustained, and have an immensely valuable impact. So this is the problem. Those who stand to benefit most from online communities are those who are least likely to use them. And for these communities simply to exist, no matter how beneficial they are to their members, is meaningless for socially and digitally excluded people, because it is simply one more thing from which they are excluded. Rates of digital inclusion have risen steadily over the last 10 years, as you would expect, as technology, as internet-connected technology becomes more predominant, and also because of the activities of organisations like ours. But it is starting to tail off. We're not quite sure why yet. Not a huge amount of research has been done into this, but it would seem to make sense that the reason that the rate is slowing down is because the people who remain digitally excluded are those hardest to reach, are the people who are most socially excluded. To get these people using online communities means getting them online in the first place. And to achieve that means making physical, real-world contact, either by getting to a place where they can learn what they need to learn in their own time, or if that isn't possible, going to where they already are, whether it's a coffee morning, a care home, or a health centre, or indeed their own home. The contact must be sustained, tailored, responsive, and above all human, if it's to have the desired effect. If we throw all of our attention and resources into developing digital communities to help disadvantaged communities, without at the same time developing better digital and social inclusion strategies, we run the risk of failing to offer help to those who need it most of all. I've mentioned research a little bit. At the moment, most of the questions that have been asked about digital exclusion and digital inclusion are relatively straightforward. How digital exclusion breaks down across demographics, behaviour and attitudes towards technology, access to equipment and connectivity, changes in skills over time. There is a need for new questions that gives a broader understanding. So many organisations have tried to teach basic online skills in so many different ways, but there have been no studies that compare their relative efficacy. We don't properly understand if, how, and to what extent digital inclusion increases things like efficacy, self-efficacy, and social mobility. And there's been no systematic research into how digital inclusion complements wider inclusion and education activities, and how each rely on the other for success. There's an enormous amount of knowledge on the ground. Managers, tutors, volunteers, and learners in our network can tell us what works for them, and we ask them about as much as they can stand. We share the information they provide, we share case studies and learning materials, we turn individual experiences into online training tools, and we do our best to foster communication between community organisations that have so much to learn from each other, but who work so often in isolation. Has anyone in the room study digital exclusion or is interested in studying it? Several people. Rebecca, I'm glad you put your hand up. That would have been worrying if not. If you are, I would encourage you to go out into the community, to carry out participatory action research at a community level that attempts to encourage behaviour change and to find out what works in practice and not just in theory. Because digital inclusion is an area of research notorious for everything working in theory. Digital civic engagement, digital political activism, education, inclusion, information on paper, or rather on screen. To be digitally included is to be a higher being with access to infinite information and resources, and phenomena like Gangnam Style and Jolly Bit My Finger tend not to be mentioned. And the fact that people need to get digitally included in the first place and how this happens is too often mentioned, not at all. I think what academia has to offer this situation is the big picture, national and international data, the ability to share stories, ideas and information, and to promote cutting-edge applications of technology that can help overcome social exclusion and digital exclusion. The grassroots support and education organisations with whom we work that are helping the most excluded and disadvantaged in society know what works and how digital communities can complement, not replace, the social resources of real communities. I think there is huge collaboration, huge potential for the collaboration and the sharing of ideas. I believe that our goal should be comprehensive digital inclusion. That wouldn't be good at all. It would keep me in a job for a while longer. That works, but more importantly is available to anybody who needs it, available and accessible. The bigger picture is made up of local and individual solutions, and without them, I think it will remain a theoretical concept. Thank you very much. I'm going to sit down and take some questions.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both very much.